Mr. Coburger prepared to plead to these charges?
Your Honor, we will be standing silent.
Earlier today, the man suspected of murdering 4 University of Idaho students stood silent as a judge entered a not guilty plea on his behalf. Good evening and thank you for joining us for KREM 2 News at 5 tonight. I'm Mark Hanrahan.
And I'm Whitney Ward. That suspect, Brian Kohberger, appearing in court for the first time in more than 5 months. This after a grand jury indicted him for those charges related to the murders of Ethan Chapin, Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogan, and Xana Kernodle last November. We do have KREM 2 crews down in Moscow bringing you team coverage tonight.
Janelle Finch has been gathering reaction from Moscow. Let's start though with Amanda Rowley, who is inside the courtroom. And Amanda, can you explain what it means to stand silent on the charges?
Yeah, that's right, Mark and Whitney. That's something I've never heard before in my time working in Spokane County courts, but it does happen. So here's how it works. They're in an arraignment. A suspect is asked to enter a guilty or not guilty plea, which are the only 2 pleas here in Idaho that Idaho courts recognize. But a suspect can also choose to stand silent or stand mute, which means to say nothing and not take a stance on being guilty or not guilty. In this case, in this morning's arraignment, Brian Kohberger chose to stand in silence and not enter a plea. And so that then set in motion, the judge must then enter a not guilty plea on his behalf. According to the indictment from the grand jury, Brian Coburger faces 5 charges, 1 count for burglary and 4 counts of first-degree murder. This morning, the judge entered a not guilty plea on Coburger's behalf on all these charges. Then we heard what the maximum penalties are if he is found guilty of all charges in a consecutive sentence.
You could be facing 10 years in prison, followed by 4 consecutive life sentences or death penalties, fines of up to $200,000 and $20,000 to be paid directly to the families.
We're still waiting to find out if this is going to be a death penalty case. We'll know more in the next 60 days. Why then? That's the deadline for the Latah County prosecutors to file their intent to seek the death penalty. We know there's a strong possibility this will be a death penalty case. That's because the county entered an agreement months ago to find a defense attorney who is qualified to represent a client who could face the death penalty. The arraignment this morning wasn't Coburger's only hearing today. He returned to the court about 30 minutes later for 2 additional hearings focused on the gag order in the trial and a motion to compel discovery. The gag order was put in place by the original judge in this case. Today was a scheduling hearing for 2 different issues. The first, the Gonsalves family attorney wants clarity so he can speak on behalf of his clients.
I'm just addressing a couple of clarifications and amendments that would allow myself as an attorney to speak on behalf of my clients.
The second was a media coalition fighting for more public information to be released in the case. The judge did not make any decisions today on the gag order, but he scheduled both motion hearings on June 9th. Now, the trial for Brian Coburger is going to be here sooner than you think. Today, the judge scheduled the start date for October 2nd. Now, in that arraignment hearing, defense attorney Ann Taylor told the judge she expects the trial will last between 4 to 6 weeks. Reporting in Moscow, Amanda Rowley, KREM 2 News.
All right, Amanda, thank you very much. And while the media may come and go from Moscow, for people living on the Palouse, this story stays top of mind.
Absolutely. KREM 2's Janelle Finch continues our live team coverage tonight with more on what people who call Moscow home are saying about this next step in the judicial process. Janelle?
Mark and Whitney, people I spoke to today say they want justice in this case. If the suspect is the person responsible for killing 4 University of Idaho students last November, then today's court appearance was one step closer to bringing him to justice. People say Moscow is small in design, which makes the loss of 4 young lives felt that much more.
It's a very quiet town. I wouldn't really expect something like that to happen here of all places.
Braden Lingle says suddenly everyone was talking about his quiet town and what had happened in a home just off the University of Idaho's campus.
Seeing University of Idaho and Moscow talked about like all over the internet, it's like I live there and this town never gets talked about, and all of a sudden it's everywhere.
To this day, people are still processing the deaths of Kaylee Gonsalves Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. Kathy Pemberton says trauma still lives in the streets of Moscow.
The loss is still there and the pain is still there.
Nothing can change the tragedy that happened last November, but Pemberton says bringing someone who may be responsible to justice is a proper step toward healing.
It's important that the person who has done something evil is properly convicted, tried, and punished for that crime, for that evil thing, because that begins the process of healing.
The murder suspect appeared in court Monday. There, a judge entered a plea of not guilty and scheduled his trial to begin in October. People say they're hopeful the state can bring this case to a proper and just end.
Hopefully this will all come to a closing soon.
I'm ready to be patient and wait and trust and hope that the state will carry out its proper responsibilities.
Yesterday, I was also down here in Moscow speaking to people in the community. One man told me him and his neighbors don't talk about the suspect unless he is appearing in court. So Moscow may be in for a quiet summer until the trial begins as scheduled in October. Until then, live in Moscow, Janelle Finch, KREM 2 News.
All right, Janelle, thank you very much. Meantime, the family of Madison Mogan is asking people to remember her on Thursday by performing random acts of kindness.
May 25th would be Madison's birthday, and she would have turned 22 this year. Her family says Maddie dedicated her life to spreading joy and kindness, so they are asking people to join them on her birthday to continue that mission. All you need to do, they said, is be kind, especially on Thursday, and then share it on social media with the hashtag Maddie Mayday. And make sure to stay with us on KREM 2 News at 5. Our team coverage coming up here in about 5 minutes as we take a look back at what has happened so far to get us to this point.
In the meantime, you can find all of our reporting on KREM.com or just text us the word Moscow to 509-448-2000. All right, let's take a quick break from the headlines to talk weather. After a hot weekend where we saw the return of summer-like temperatures, today was the start of a brief cool down.
Yeah, it felt kind of nice after all that heat. Let's send it over to our chief meteorologist, Jeremy Legoo.
Oh, I just can't get enough of this cloud cover and the cooler temps, maybe even the little breeze. But enjoy it while you can, because we've got a big shift in the weather pattern that works its way in starting tomorrow. Right now, we sit in the mid-60s, and it's a mix of clouds and sun and a quite beautiful scene outside. But you don't have to go too far to notice that there's a change. You step out the door and you're going to notice the wind, and the wind stays pretty strong through sunset. Sunset now, almost 8:30 p.m. How cool is that? Wind gusts stay strong through the 8 o'clock hour for that reason, and then eventually die down. We also have some storms, most of those just north of town, and I think they stay north of Highway 2 and I-90. That's kind of the way they're looking, and most of that activity continues to kind of weaken. We saw that storm move through Chewelah, and now it's losing some steam, even moving over the mountains, and it's eventually going to make its way into North Idaho. This post-frontal activity looks to wind down tonight, and by tomorrow, it's nothing but sunshine across the region, and that trend looks to take us through the next few days. Tomorrow, we're back in the upper 60s. Believe it or not, 68 comes up about average, so does 72 on Wednesday. By Thursday, though, we'll call 76 above average, and that heat keeps building as we head into the weekend.
All right, Jeremy, sounds good. Thank you very much. In other top headlines tonight, Washington Governor Jay Inslee appointed Spokane City Council President Breanne Beggs to serve as a judge for Spokane County Superior Court.
Beggs will now replace Judge Michael Price when he retires on July 1st. All of this comes more than 2 months after Beggs announced that he would not be seeking re-election to the City Council. He has been a litigation attorney since 1991, with his main focuses being on civil rights, employment, and personal injury.
He was elected to City Council as president in January of 2020 and served as a council member from 2016 until 2019.